We had this feeling of doom luring in front of us. We'll never get back to Germany after we have entered this country.
The Russians were fighting for their lives, for their country, with their backs to the wall, and they knew that there was no retreat.
In my village, I saw the defense of my homeland, my country. That's why I put all my strength into it, even assuming that I would make it back alive.
Russia, 1993. 4 old soldiers of the Soviet Union visit the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. Even today, years after the collapse of the communist state, the museum is filled with tributes to the USSR's military achievements. Not surprisingly, the subject of most of the exhibitions is the victory over Nazi Germany during World War II, what the Russians call the Great Patriotic War. Major General Peter Platushikin was just 21 when he commanded a platoon of T-34 tanks at the Battle of Kursk, the largest clash of armored forces in history. The battle was epic in scale and brutal beyond belief.
Well, it's very difficult to convey these feelings, you understand. Because we were in the kind of situation where you had no time to think about whether you'd be alive or not. And we didn't think about the fact that we might not get out of this battle alive.
For the survivors of Kursk, and for most of the veterans of the Great Patriotic War, the battle against Germany was not a test of political wills, communism versus fascism. It was a fight for survival, a battle to the death against invaders who sought to kill or enslave the Soviet people. (1941). Nazi Germany has captured France and overrun continental Europe. The German Wehrmacht is now the best trained, best equipped army in the world. The Wehrmacht answers to Adolf Hitler, who by this point has won the respect of even the skeptical German General Staff. Hitler has made good on his promise to the German people. The humiliating defeat of World War I has been cancelled out by the French surrender of 1940. England seems his next target, but the invasion never comes. For Hitler has his eye on a bigger prize, the largest nation in the world, the Soviet Union. In 1939, Hitler signs a non-aggression pact with Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. The treaty stuns the world, for German fascists are sworn enemies of communism. But this is not a treaty of friendship. Both men are biding time. Stalin is in particular trouble. Fearing a coup, he assassinated 2/3 of his generals in the late 1930s. The Red Army is ill-prepared for battle. Hitler realizes this, and over the protests of his generals, he orders a full-scale sneak attack on Russia. It begins on June 22, 1941. It is the largest land assault ever mounted, and initially, it is an amazing success. In the first 2 months of the invasion, German fast mechanized columns blast through Soviet defenses, followed by cavalry and infantry. But despite these impressive gains, the Wehrmacht has penetrated just a sliver of the vast Soviet empire.
When the war in Russia started, we had this feeling of doom luring in front of us. Very many of my closer comrades and myself too, we said in the very first days, we'll never get back to Germany after we have entered this country. You know, it was so oppressing from all sides. But it was at the time when the spirit of the German army was still completely unbroken. So regardless of the overwhelming mass we had to face, we still felt sure we could handle it.
Germany invaded Russia primarily to seize the nation's vast oil supplies and rich farmlands. But an uglier motive drove the invasion as well. According to the Nazi Party's doctrines of racial purity, the Slavic people were considered subhumans, fit only for two things: slavery and death.
Hitler made his intention clear to conduct the war very differently, as an ideological war meant to suppress the Russian people. In the Ukraine, we had been welcomed with salt and bread in the villages because they believed we had come to liberate them. And if we had done that, we would have won the war against Russia. But unfortunately, we then conducted it very differently politically, and that was our undoing.
Und das ist das Verderben gewesen.
The Russians were fighting for their lives, for their country, with their backs to the wall, and they knew that there was no retreat. I mean, of course, one of the greatest mistakes the Germans made was because of their known ruthlessness towards Russian prisoners. There was very little incentive for a Russian to be taken prisoner by the German army, so the Russians had everything to fight for.
Hitler and his commanders had expected to capture Russia and its key cities in 3 months. But by October, the Soviets were fighting harder and better than ever. Outside of Moscow, they made a dramatic counterthrust that threw the Germans off balance. Then winter came, and as temperatures dropped, German equipment broke down. And the German army, which went into battle that first winter without cold weather gear, paid the price. The German offensive stalled. But by spring 1942, the battle was on again. Now the Germans were driving towards the oil fields east of the Black Sea. At first it seemed that Soviet resistance was fading. In fact, the Russians were preparing to make a stand.
The Russians' greatest single advantage, of course, was space. But in the first year or two of the war, they were again and again able to trade space for time, because the one commodity of which the Russians had an almost infinite amount was territory. And they gave up miles and millions of square miles of territory in order to buy themselves the time to rebuild their armies.
The Soviet High Command had decided to stiffen its resistance at key points. One such point was the city of Stalingrad. Hitler was determined to capture the city for symbolic reasons. The result was a months-long battle that reduced the city to rubble. The German tactic of using armored fighting vehicles for lightning assaults was useless at Stalingrad. German soldiers were forced to battle the population of an entire city, street to street, apartment to apartment. The Russians decimated the German Sixth Army, their first undeniable victory, and Germany's first major defeat. The Wehrmacht's magnificently trained and experienced troops were overwhelmed by sheer force of numbers.
They were Russians fighting for their capital, you know, and they were rushing toward us, clearly knowing that we had only, it is fantastic to think about this aspect of warfare, clearly knowing we had only a limited amount of ammunition. And this gone, the sheer mass of them would be the winners.
When I defended my native village, I had only one feeling. In my village, I saw the defense of my homeland, my country, because it was a little piece of my fatherland. That's why I put all my strength into it, even assuming that I would make it back alive. and it motivated me to take part in the defense and the counterattack at Kursk to defeat the German fascist aggressors.
The defeat at Stalingrad shocked the Wehrmacht, but the Germans responded with a counterattack that led to the recapture of the pivotal city of Kharkov. Now seemed the time for the Wehrmacht to dig in and fortify its position. But politics and pride were driving Hitler to mount another major offensive on the Eastern Front. It would be called Operation Citadel, and its center was a little-known city in central Russia called Kursk. (1943). The German army expects Russia to launch a major summer offensive. Germany decides to strike first by throwing the Wehrmacht's best men and machines against the armies encamped around the city of Kursk. The Kursk Bulge, as it was called, was a swell into German-occupied territory that formed after the Battle of Stalingrad. The German Wehrmacht's plan was to entrap the Soviet armies inside the bulge by attacking in the north and south in a classic pincers movement. But Soviet spies had learned of the top-secret plan months in advance. The Russians were now counting on the offensive, and they began making massive preparations for it. Over the course of spring and summer, the Red Army turned the Kursk Bulge into an armed fortress filled with 3,500 tanks and self-propelled guns, 1,300,000 soldiers armed with 20,000 guns and mortars, and nearly 2,000 aircraft. The German army was outmanned and outgunned. Two full Soviet armies waited inside the Kursk Bulge for the German attack. A third army was held in reserve, 100 miles to the south. Generals Konstantin Rokossovsky and Nikolai Vatutin were tasked with holding the line against the German 9th Army and the 4th Panzer Army. When Hitler learned of the Soviet buildup, he nearly canceled the attack. But politics demanded he strike. Hitler decided to compromise. He would postpone the assault until a new generation of German tanks could be sent into battle. The new tanks were designed to counter the threat posed by Russia's T-34. Introduced in 1941, the T-34 was an ideal combination of firepower, armored protection, and speed. Only the German Panzer Corps' cunning and experience allowed them to hold their own against it.
It was a very good tank, superior to our tanks in terms of maneuverability, armor plating, and in part its armament. As a result, we were quite surprised when it appeared in large numbers and when our anti-tank guns failed to penetrate it.
Germany responded to the T-34 with two of the best-known tanks in history, the fast and maneuverable Panzer V, or Panther, and the heavyweight Tiger, certainly the most intimidating tank of the Second World War. The Tiger was armed with an incredible 88mm gun and thick armor plating. But the Tiger and the Panther were new and prone to breaking down. Many German tankers would ride into battle in older, vulnerable Panzers. But the battle was not soon in coming. Hitler kept postponing the start of what the Wehrmacht called Operation Citadel. Both sides dug in and waited for the attack to begin. Behind the scenes, some Soviet commanders argued that the Red Army should seize the momentum and attack. But calmer leaders, including Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, prevailed. The Red Army had built 6 separate defensive belts expressly designed to crush a German armored attack. Zhukov was not about to see this trap go to waste. The Russians would wait. Finally, the Germans made their move. On July 5th, the Battle of Kursk began. But Hitler and his generals already had doubts about its success.
The Russian army had months to reinforce the curve of the front line at Kursk They knew that it would be attacked. Just as we had done every other time, we attacked from the two sides. And the Russians were completely prepared for that attack and had dug in their tanks position after position. And in my opinion, the German offensive against the curved front line at Kursk was a mistake. My father warned Hitler against it, and Hitler himself had told my father, "I have a very uneasy feeling about this."
Now the largest clash of mechanized forces in history was underway.
I was born in Kursk, and what's interesting is that I was defending my own home and my loved ones. It's important to note that these battles were such that they brought the troops into very close contact, with military formations overlapping each other, and battles often turning into hand-to-hand skirmishes. I personally was on the first line of combat, and the tension was terrible, every single day, both during the defensive and offensive phases of combat.
By the end of the first day of battle, the German army had pushed less than 8 kilometers into the Red Army's northern defense lines. This was disappointing at best, for the Soviet defense belts stretched back another 200 miles. By July 11th, the attack had stalled. The Germans had gained less than 12 kilometers in 7 days. But in the south, the Red Army was fighting for its life.
More than anything, we feared the handheld anti-tank guided missiles, the so-called Panzerfaust. They were dangerous. The Germans had a lot of these weapons. They were very effective. They burned through the tank's armor, and the tank burned up, of course. Those we were afraid of.
Many perished, many comrades, many tanks were destroyed. The thing is that we had T-34s with 76mm guns, and it was very difficult to destroy a Panther or a Tiger. Let me say that you could hit the wheels to stop the tank, or aim for the observation ports to blind the tank, or hit the flank of the tank from a short distance, which rarely was possible. Nonetheless, our comrades, not I myself, mind you, became more clever. They would go ahead in an ambush and would destroy enemy tanks from a close distance.
After the breakthrough from a defense line, we were in the middle of Russian infantry, and I was with my tank in the middle of these people, and I could see from my turret at left and right the poor Russian soldier regard me, and I made the sign, came. Nothing, no reaction. I take my pistol and I fired, not directly, but on the side from him. No reaction. And then I took a small hand grenade against this. He takes it and replayed. So I thought, if you are so hard, you can stay still alive. I could not stay half an hour only with one soldier.
The incredible sense of patriotism exhibited by the commanders and soldiers who were being treated amazed us. It was hard to keep these officers and soldiers in their cots. As soon as they felt better, as soon as they felt okay, they tried to leave the hospital, not for the rear, but for the front.
July 9, 1943. After a week of relentless fighting, the German Wehrmacht has broken through 3 Soviet defense lines south of Kursk. The Soviets are forced to call in their trump card, an entire army of reinforcements. On July 12th, a massive Soviet armored column streams toward the German army's panzer force. They collide near the small town of Prokhorovka.
What was it like to experience the battle near Prokhorovka? Well, first as we approached the front line, it became clear that very tough, stubborn battles were going on. Enemy air power was constantly bombarding the front line. Everything was covered in smoke and dust. It was summer. It was very hot and dusty. And from afar, the front line looked like a snake, a creeping snake.
Death doesn't always look you straight in the eyes. Sometimes it comes from behind, or it comes crashing down on you. That is, we were simply in a situation of being surrounded on all sides by the danger of being killed or maimed.
At Prokhorovka, Soviet tanks charged directly into German ranks. The attack is so sudden that both sides' formations become intermingled. All day long, some 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns trade fire in a battle of unprecedented ferocity. At nightfall, Germans and Russians withdraw, leaving a battlefield littered with hundreds of burning tanks and well over 100,000 dead and wounded soldiers. Neither side can declare victory. On July 13th, the day after Prokhorovka, Hitler cancels Operation Citadel, citing the Allied invasion of Sicily. Victory in Russia is now unlikely at best. The Battle of Kursk has cost Hitler over 1,500 tanks and 500,000 men. The Red Guard lost nearly as many men at Kursk as the Wehrmacht. But in Russia, soldiers are never in short supply. After Prokhorovka, the Soviets immediately launch a counterattack, the first of many battles that slowly drive the Germans out of Russia. The Wehrmacht fights tenaciously, but the Russians are willing to bear incredible losses if the result is victory.
You felt a sense of responsibility, and you forgot everything else. You only thought about fulfilling the order you had been given, which was not a single step back. That's how we operated.
By 1945, the Red Guard had broken into Germany and was advancing slowly toward Berlin. The closer they came, the harder the Germans fought. Now the atrocities that followed in the wake of the German invasion of Russia were being visited upon the Germans themselves.
It definitely wasn't worthless. To lose a war, though, after such huge initial success, is the worst thing that can happen to a soldier. And to learn after the war about all the terrible things that went on behind one's own back, things that one was perhaps just barely suspecting but did not know, and things that were suppressed so you wouldn't become weak but stick it out. All in all, it is nothing to be proud of, but it was a time that shaped a person. After all, we fought a war for over 5 years.
On May 7, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered to the Allies. Germany had been bombed and shelled into a blighted landscape filled with tired, desperate survivors. During the final days of the war, Germans fled en masse to American Army positions rather than face the prospect of life or death at the hands of angry Russians. But for most, escape was impossible. A hard new life was dawning for the people of what became East Germany. The Great Patriotic War had come to a bitter end.